Let's look a little bit at the real world data that's come out since OMIDRIA. But first, let's talk about the phase 2 study. So in the phase 2 study, they had to break up by the FDA guidelines for the study. They had to break up the components into two separate arms, and then a vehicle as well. So they had vehicle, which is just BSS, and then they had ketorolac in one group at the same concentration that OMIDRIA has, and then they had phenylephrine in another group, just them alone. And we looked at videotape surgery where the pupil diameter got less than 6 millimeters at any time during the surgery. And with vehicle, about half the patients did okay, and the other half had a smaller than 6 millimeter pupil. With ketorolac, I think surprisingly, it actually did reduce that number to 35%, had a pupil smaller than 6 millimeters. And so it's interesting that it actually had some effect. But with phenylephrine, patients that had less than 6 millimeter pupil anytime during surgery was only 22%. And we expect that. So it's twice as good as placebo at keeping that pupil above 6 millimeters. And when I first saw this data, I thought, okay, so we know that phenylephrine should keep the pupil dilated better than nothing, and better than ketorolac. That makes sense to me. But what about if we combine the two, like they did in this study, the phenylephrine and ketorolac together? My thought before I click the next button here to show you, I thought, well, it'll probably be just like phenylephrine, or maybe it'll be a little bit better at preventing intraoperative miosis. But actually, it's a lot better. We only had 6% of patients have a pupil less than 6 millimeters when we combine the two. So that is, as you guys know, is synergism. There's a synergistic effect of having the two combined, so that it's now about 6 times more effective at preventing miosis than either ketorolac or phenylephrine alone. And if you follow that up with a phase 3 study where we do 2 larger cohorts, and we look at the same kind of data. So any way you look at however you want to look at the data, keeping the pupil well dilated, either a decrease in pupil diameter greater than 2.5 at any time during surgery, or again, looking at a pupil diameter that's larger than 6 millimeters versus smaller than 6 millimeters. You can see versus placebo, OMIDRIA had a very rare incidence of a small pupil or a pupil being reduced by 2.5 millimeters or less than 6 millimeters. So I think of it sort of like in football, like a goal line stand, like you have a really good defense, and then maybe they march down from 8 millimeters to 7 millimeters, but instead of getting less than 6 millimeters, which it does with placebo, especially in your IFAS patients, it stops at 6 millimeters. It doesn't get any less than that, which is really nice. And I think, if you're not familiar with OMIDRIA and you first use it, you might think, it's not much different than a regular case. But it's hard to know unless you had that same patient a week before and didn't use it, and then you realize it does have that potential benefit of keeping the pupil larger.